Hi, everybody. Croeso I Gymru. Welcome to Wales. It's great to see you all here. Many of you I know are probably here on the eve of the Beyond conference, which we're very excited to be hosting here in Cardiff. I'm Justin Lewis. I'm the director of CoSTAR, which is part of the AHRC's fabulous Creative Industries Clusters program. And many other of colleagues from across the UK I see are here today as part of that. I'm also the director of MediaCymru, which very excitingly will be launching tomorrow night in this building at 7 o'clock. We'd love to see you there. If you haven't signed up to go to it, check out the website and do sign up for that, because we have quite big numbers at this point. So if you could sign up for that, just to make sure you get your free 2 glasses of wine. Otherwise, we'll just run out. But it's great to see you all here. And it's great that we're going to be launching CoSTAR here in Wales. So I'm not going to really beat about the bush and really just hand over to Laura and Andrew. Before I do, a bit of housekeeping. The toilets are just outside here on this floor. So you just go outside that door, follow the signs. I think they're on the left. So that's where they are. I don't think there's anything else I need to do on the housekeeping front. So welcome one and all, and welcome especially to Andrew and to Laura. And we're all very excited to see everything we want to know about CoSTAR. So thanks both.
Thanks, Justin. Welcome everyone. So this is the first of a series of briefing events that we're going to do around the UK about CoSTAR. And as the first one, there are probably various bits that are going to go wrong. You'll have questions which we won't be able to answer. And one of the things we're going to do is throughout, whilst the call is open, we're going to have a rolling series of FAQs, and we'll probably come back to that at the end. So, CoSTAR, National R&D Infrastructure for the Screen and Performance Sector. So this is something new. Obviously, many of you will have been engaged in Audience of the Future or in the Clusters program, which is the AHRC program, which is ongoing. But this is something different. So what we're going to try and do in the next just under 2 hours, you will get tea at the end, is we're going to talk first of all a bit about the rationale of CoSTAR. So why are we doing this? What is CoSTAR? Why are we doing it? Why are we doing it now? What's the opportunity? And one of the things that then we'll talk about a bit is about an infrastructure and CoSTAR, what CoSTAR is now and what it might become in the future. Then I'll hand over to Laura for the second section, which is the competition briefing. So this is a briefing on, I know you'll all have done your homework and been reading it, if not on the not before on the train on the way here. So Laura will take you through the rules and regulations of the competition for these lots, what we're asking for, but also what we're not asking for, which is always, I think, worth doing at a briefing, and thinking a bit about the partnerships that we're expecting you to put together. Then we'll have a goodly time for question and answers. As I say, it's early in the call. Sometimes we might have to take some of those questions back and think about it. But on the other hand, there may be just some we just dismiss out of hand. And then we're going to have a panel at the end, a brilliant panel, to air some of the issues and some of the, just open up the discussion a little bit. And then we'll release you and we'll get tea. So Justin said that it's Laura and I. So just wanted to introduce you to, so the CoSTAR team for the competition is myself, so I'm the AHRC's Creative Economy Champion, but working with Laura, identifiable there in the top right, for those who don't know Laura already, as strategic lead, and Hannah, where's Hannah? Stick your hand up. Hannah Farag, who's there, is Head of Impact and Delivery. Now, in Cardiff today, we're very, very lucky that we also have Hannah Cholklin and Tao Tao Chang from the AHRC's infrastructure team. And indeed, Tao is the mastermind of this. This is the first of a series of big infrastructure investments by the AHRC. So Tao's going to be on the panel at the end. Now that's a one-off chance. She's not going to be able to make every one of the events. So you can ask all the technical questions about what can you do with infrastructure funding and what you can't do to Tao. Right, and as you know, this is the look at this fantastic corporate animation. So obviously, this the money for CoSTAR comes from UKRI's infrastructure fund, but CoSTAR is an Arts and Humanities Research Council programme. So, that's enough of that. Rationale for CoSTAR. So, yeah, what, who, why now, and where. And I'll come back to where, but then I won't answer the question of where, because obviously that would be inappropriate. So what's CoSTAR about? So it's about, I think it's about these three things. So what I call advanced media production. So I'd love to copyright this phrase because it will stop us talking about virtual production, because sooner or later virtual production will just become production. So, and I think there's an interesting way the manufacturing sector has got away with advanced manufacturing. It's just manufacturing. It's just modern manufacturing. So it's about, we know that a series of technologies are transforming the way we make things across the creative industries. So there's lots of talk around virtual production, particularly in film, high and TV at the moment, but that's just the start of how this stack of technologies come together. The UK is globally competitive at this stuff. We're good at this stuff. We're good, obviously, at production, and we're also very good at IP generation. But we are in a fantastic position to push this forward now and to underpin the growth of the creative industries as these technologies transform the way we make things. So advanced media production, I think, might be a durable term that we can still use in a couple of years' time. Although, obviously, in research funding terms, we might want to take a lesson from the medics and just reinvent another term for exactly the same thing, which seems to always get them lots of funding. So the other thing it's about is about creative R&D, and a lot of you are engaged in creative R&D, and indeed the steps forward that we've made in creative R&D over the last 5 years with the Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund programs. So how I define creative R&D is it's applied research for the creative industries. So before clusters, it was a big step forward to try and bring together universities and industries to think about R&D that was for the creative industries rather than R&D that was about the creative industries. And I think that's really important when we think about CoSTAR, that it's following that trend. So this is a research infrastructure for the creative industries. The purpose of CoSTAR is to create value, ultimately, in the creative industries. So obviously, Audience of the Future and the Clusters Programme, one of the things they've shown, and lots of the people in this room, I haven't worked out how many clusters are represented, but probably 6 out of the 9 are probably in the room at the moment. So one of the things the clusters have really proven is that industry and university partnerships can deliver impact, but they can also deliver that impact at scale. And that's down, to me, to what the clusters have done. It wasn't a necessary success when we started that program. So creative R&D, we all know a lot more about than we did. There are some sectors of the creative industries that struggle with thinking about what the R&D pipeline is for their sectors, but that's not true in screen and performance. And then I think it's the change here is thinking about infrastructure. So this isn't about project funding. This is about funding long-term, persistent facilities and then a network between those facilities. And I think that's really a first for the creative industries. In many ways, again, the clusters have shown the way forward, but they were conceived as large projects. I think the other thing that it being an infrastructure is about is it's not just about solutions for current problems. It's also about developing the next generation of technologies and applications. So if we're building an R&D infrastructure, it isn't just for things that we can see from now to 2 or 3 years out, but it's got to be from now to 5 years out. So as I said, virtual production is what we call this stuff at the moment, but what's the next wave that comes beyond what we're seeing being deployed at the moment? So, advanced media production, creative R&D, and infrastructure. So it's about that. So why are we doing this? Well, I think one element is about there is a convergence going on. Now, I've been around the block long enough to to have seen many arguments run about convergence. I think what's interesting at the moment is the convergence between the technologies is quite tight, and it's not theoretical, it's actually happening on the ground. So whether it's XR technologies or Web3 technologies or real-time visualization, the way we capture performances, it is actually happening, and there is a commonality around it. I think the other interesting thing about convergence is how that's also a thing that goes on with the roles and the people doing these things, so the skills and the roles. You're getting people now moving between live performance, live music, live theatre, movies, using similar sets of these technologies. But that's all this where we're at the moment. I think there's another wave of the impact of artificial intelligence and machine learning that will impact on that stack of technologies, so it involves. So definitely there's convergence. Why are we saying screen and performance? Well, I think that's because it's happening now, and there is a coherence around the technologies, around screen and performance, and they become kind of a continuum, I think. I think another reason is, let's be honest, we have huge strengths in these core creative industries around, I should say, when we say screen, we mean film, TV, and games. People from the game sector probably hate that, but it's in the business case, so I have to keep saying it. So we have enormous strengths in those three sectors, performance, both live performance in music and theatrical performance in games and in film. But I think the other thing is, if we focus on screen and performance, we can see how that pulls in and engages some of the other sectors. So fashion, so issues around drape and costume and materials as they're used in film, or also have commonality with using these technologies in fashion, and the rolling out of these technologies into advertising and communications. And I think the other thing then about the why is we've described this as an innovation infrastructure when we went to argue for the money, rather than just an R&D infrastructure. So I think the potential for growing further the UK's creative industries is absolutely fundamental here. So one of those things is, I think is really interesting, is the democratization of these technologies. So high-end virtual production in film is a pretty expensive business at the moment. There are potentially far more uses than that high end of the market. So moving from high end to mass market is a huge growth opportunity. I think there are niches that we can support for new creative technology firms. So we can grow firms as well as production, as well as IP. And I think through that we can drag in significant private sector investment, which is a theme that runs throughout the presentation. So I'm glad Mark Lever's in the audience, because the next slide takes some data from a publication that Mark did around virtual production. And one of the things when we say, why did we think we've got a great opportunity in the UK, is if you just look at virtual production as it's thought of now, the UK is in a fairly extraordinary place. So these very, very high-end virtual production stages, when Mark and his colleagues at DIT did this survey, how long ago, Mark? 6 months ago? 9 months ago? Look, yeah, so it was 2022. Yeah, so March this year. There were 12 tier 1 stages, so the really big, capable stages in the UK, and 10 of those were concentrated in London and the South East. And that compares with 9 in the whole of the US, of which 4 are in LA. So that's an extraordinary concentration of contemporary kind of cutting-edge production technologies in the UK. And when you compare it with the rest of the world, so you've got 3 in Canada, 2 in Germany, although I hear might be only 1 in Germany from the near future, 1 in Australia and 1 in Japan. So you see this incredible, at the really high end, the UK's in an incredible position around this. So we've got that as the state of production at the moment, but there are other reasons to do this urgently. I think one of them is what we saw, particularly in Audience of the Future, is the way that COVID accelerated the adoption of these technologies, not just in film, but we saw this in games and performance as well. So there was an acceleration of the adoption of these technologies because of the pandemic, because what the pandemic did was tip the business case into using this stuff rather than not using it. And wherever you think we are on the hype curve around virtual production or advanced production or whatever you want to call it, it will continue despite there may be bumps on the way. This is not a trend that's going to go backwards. And that's pulled in a whole wave of investment. Obviously, we know all of us about the wave of production, of investment in production facilities in the UK. And so what I think we're trying to do with CoSTAR is, in a way, smooth the waves of production investment by investing in R&D that invests in the next wave of those technologies. So if everything's about virtual production as we see it now, what we need to be looking at with CoSTAR is, yes, looking at that and spreading its availability to companies and to researchers, but also thinking about what comes next and starting to invest in the R&D that would underpin that. And that underpins then the case for the UK as a place to come and do innovation. And then I think the other thing is, and this is where it starts to get, the kind of forward look starts to get a bit foggy, and I think there'll be people, certainly I'm sure Susan has on the panel, has a view on this particularly, is how do we get, with this investment in R&D, from current visions of virtual production to the metaverse? And we don't have to believe in a particular version of the metaverse. There are lots of flavors of this, but it's clear that this is not only about linear screen outputs. So I think we've got to think about what are the future capabilities that, as Laura will talk about, these labs, we've called them, will have. Think about their capabilities for the metaverse, not just thinking about what current technologies, what kit do they have, but it's about future capabilities. And future capabilities for a 3 to 5 year horizon rather than just the very near future. So, as I said, we've called it an innovation infrastructure. And that's because we want the R&D activities that happen in this infrastructure to grow companies and create new ones. So not just do R&D, but explicitly to grow companies and create new ones, to commercialize the processes that come out of the work done in these facilities, and to exploit IP. So, in a way, innovation-led business growth is central to this as part of the activities that go on in this infrastructure. It's not an R&D and then hope that we commercialize. We've got to be thinking about that as part of the infrastructure. And that's part of the case that Tau largely sold to the Treasury, and they agreed. And that was probably only 2 chancellors ago. So we've tried to, you've probably seen this rather uncomfortable. I tried to break this down. We tried to put this into a delivery objective, a single sentence. So I was going to break it down a bit. So we're trying to underpin long-term competitiveness of the UK screen and performance sector for the moment by providing a capable R&D infrastructure that enables, so here are the user groups, researchers, companies and institutions across the UK to access facilities, capabilities and insight, to ensure they can do world-class R&D in applying the current and future waves of computing technologies. And all that is to transform the means of production. We know this is going on in some areas already. That transformation is quite advanced, but it will go right across these sectors within the period of the grants that will come out of the CoSTAR program. So, who do you need to put together one of these things? We think you can't do this as a single institution, deliver even parts of this infrastructure. So we're talking about partnerships. Partnerships really with 4 groups in them. Research organisations, so for the technically minded, that's universities, research organisations, research technology organisations, don't know if anybody would like to put their hand up in the room as being one of those, or independent research organisations. The reason for them, and they have to be the lead, is these are the people the AHRC can give money to. So we have to have that at the heart of the partnership, in fact, heading the partnership. You then need industry, and you need industry because one of the things we're asking you to do is explore co-siting these facilities with industry. And the reason to do that is to have an ongoing exchange between industry and research. So it's not research over here, let's go and talk to industry when we've got something to tell them. It's this all happens in a common working environment. And that's absolutely critical to the business case we've put forward. Then we think that if you're putting together something like this, you'll want to have local or regional economic partners. So that could be local authorities, could be combined authorities. If you're in England, could be LEPs if they still exist. Yes, they probably do still at the moment, don't they? Well, until we have a government that can actually change that. But it could be development agencies in the nations, it could be city deals. But you want those partners because of what they can bring to this in terms of tying into the local economy and amplifying the activities. So if one of these entities is placed in a place, then your local economic partners, as we've found with the clusters, can do great things with that. And then you've got users. So you've got a customer group for these facilities. So that could be right across the creative industries, could be production SMEs, could be creative technology companies, research groups, studios. I just wanted to say something about co-investment, because you'll notice that the invitation to the call has some figures for co-investment. I just wanted to explain a little bit the rationale behind that. So the business case for CoSTAR set a minimum co-investment for each lot. So that's 15, but just above 15 million for lot one, which is the national lab and the two additional functionalities around that, and 4.5 million across the network labs. The graph on the right shows how co-investment was raised by the clusters. And this is really interesting in our thinking, because when we did the Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund, when we started off, government were obsessed with co-investment at the start. How much money can you get from industry on day one? Well, it turns out that's not a sensible way to look at co-investment, because if you're looking at how much co-investment you can generate over the lifetime of something, actually, as things are established, you can generate more and more co-investment as you build trust and reputation. So we identified 4 different types of co-investment, and they're the dark blue, the light blue, the yellowy thing, and the green. So the initial co-investment is the dark blue. But then you've got additional co-investment, which was the same partners coming up with more money as they thought what they could do with the clusters. Then the light blue, which was the light blue, which was the additional. Then the yellowy stack is aligned funding. So things that weren't doing exactly the same thing as the clusters, or not the same thing as CoSTAR in this case, but something that aligns with it. So you'll notice we've said you can't do a skills, this money can't be used for skills. Doesn't mean someone else can't fund a skills program based out of the investment in the facilities. And then you've got follow-on funding. So the clusters did an extraordinary job here, far beyond what we ever expected. They raised £200 million on the back of just over £50 million of public money. And I'm not saying we can do the same, but 400% leverage. We can't say that it's impossible anymore, because all of those good people in the clusters told us that they've actually done this. So how I think that we might square this circle is that if you think of those minimum figures that are in the call document, think of those as the initial investment that you need to tell us at least that. But tell us how far you could go with this kind of model, things that might follow on afterwards. I think that's really important in as you build the partnerships. Right, we're getting towards the proper bit in a minute, Laura, so don't worry. Right, little bit about governance. So there's a governance diagram in the thing. It's incredibly exciting and really interesting. But what it's actually showing is, that's our current thinking. But what it's showing is, what we've got at the bottom is, eventually we'll have 4 labs, one of the national lab with a couple of extra capabilities, and we'll have this data insight and foresight unit. But what we want to do is run them as a coordinated infrastructure, coordinated through I think we're calling it a strategy board at the moment, with representatives of all the delivery partners on it. But I think that we also recognise, and this is something we'll pick up in the panel with Tao, is that infrastructure funding is different, because this is for 6 years, but it's only to set up and build and test this stuff. The idea with an infrastructure is it goes on. So this model, how it's governed, can well evolve with that as well. And as I've said, there may be functions that aren't paid for by the infrastructure money that are things that you all want to do, which can be done with other partners on top of that. And it may well be, and I would hope it is, that by the time this infrastructure money runs out, there's a mixed funding model to support this infrastructure going forward. Some of it from UKRI, but some of it from industry, some of it from other bits of UKRI than infrastructure funding. So I think we should all be looking for the EPSRC grants around some of this research as well. So I'll just finish by saying something about where. And what I'm going to say about where, don't tell me that you all haven't started plotting things like this on the right-hand side. I'm sure you have. So where, the first thing to say is we have no settled view on where the elements of the CoSTAR infrastructure should be placed. So just for the avoidance of doubt, we have no settled view on that. However, we are mindful of the uneven economic geography of the creative industries. I mean, anybody who works in the creative industry should be aware of that. And we are also, through this call and others, we're commissioning a national infrastructure. But the point of a national infrastructure is that it must provide access for all, from anywhere across the UK. It does not have to be present in every place. Certainly at this stage, we haven't got enough money to do that. So that's the balancing thing about where. We aren't fixed. We aren't saying it has to look like this or it has to be weighted like this. But we are mindful that the creative industries and screen and performance equally so are not evenly spread across the UK, and we want a national infrastructure. So I guess what we want to know through the application process is how what you're proposing can contribute to this kind of network. Not only what you can deliver through whatever part of it that you're bidding for, but what that contributes uniquely to the network. What you can deliver in terms of long-term impacts locally and or nationally, and also how that's going to support or build or accelerate business clusters. So we imagine that these pieces of infrastructure could grow a series of firms around them. I mean, that's a normal thing that we've seen if you look at, kind of science-based infrastructures. So that's the thing. We're not going to say where, and we are, as we've indicated, I think, in the call document, we're going to take a portfolio decision about the best matching of all these pieces. It's for you to tell us why, on the objectives we set out, the proposals you make through your partnerships are going to deliver. So that's the big waffly bit. And now it's over to Laura Partridge for the actual competition brief.
Thank you, Andrew. Hello, everyone. It's lovely to be here. Yes, I am Laura Partridge. I think I've crossed paths with a lot of you in my previous role as the Innovation Lead at Audience of the Future. For those that haven't seen me yet, it's very nice to meet you, and I hope this is the start of lots of conversations about CoSTAR. So, Andrew's brilliantly done the what and the why. For people, and I hope it's most of you, sat in the room with intent to apply, let's talk about how. So, this current funding call, opened on Tuesday the 11th, is for lots 1 and 2 at 63.6 million. There will be a later call at a later date, TBC, for lot 3, but today we're just going to talk about the mechanics around applying for these first 2 lots. The National Lab, Andrew's just talked a lot about that, just to expand on some of the detail a little bit. So this is about the large national lab, technology readiness levels 3 to 6. So this is a focus on applied research, and it's very much about thinking about the future, seeding stuff now for future development. Co-sited with industry, not with HEI. I think Andrew might have made that clear, but we're going to keep saying it today. So we'll get on to partners in a moment, but that alludes to some of the detail that Andrew gave us already. So the expectations around the National Lab is that it would probably be a new build, must have, as Andrew mentioned, a local economic partner, be that LEPs, combined authorities, local authorities, delete as appropriate depending on your regional geography across the UK. And absolutely is about that. What are we building now for tomorrow and the future, and building that into the vision. So that's the National Lab. Network labs. There'll be up to 3 of these, and as we've said already, geography to be determined, but we seek to try and balance some of that regional imbalance around and distribution of funding. Let's see what comes in. These are more at near-to-market research and innovation, so TRLs 6 to 9-ish. And they might serve one particular geography, or they might serve one particular sectoral group, or they might do both of those things. Again, co-sited with industry, not with HEI. And slightly differently on the expectations, we would imagine that the network labs would be an upgrade, an extension or an expansion of existing facilities with those same partners needed. So they would also become a focus of that future business cluster, and they would work with the National Lab in terms of channeling some of those ideas, proposing and contributing to programs that the National Lab might co-deliver with them. And the competition rules. So Andrew's made clear, the lead organisation in any bids needs to be a research organisation, an RTO or an IRO. That partnership must have at least one industry hosting partner. So looking at studios, production facilities, performance venues, that would be one of the core partners. And similarly, your economic regional development agency would be a second core partner. You can have up to a maximum of 5 core partners in total. And so those other 2 could also be other ROs, RTOs or IROs, or it could be industry partners. And those lead bidders leading the application process on GES need to have backing from the very head of their organisation for these applications to commence. And on the bidding, right, so you could bid to lead one bid for, you could put in one bid for the National Lab. You could bid in for 1, 2 or up to 3 network labs. However, if you were awarded, if you were selected to deliver on the National Lab, you wouldn't also be operating a network lab. If you're a partner, you can partner on up to 2 bids to host a national lab, or you can partner on 3 of the bids for network labs. As you hopefully know, we have opened the call, and the deadline is the 2nd of February 2023. We'll then immediately go into an assessment period with preferred bidders announced at the end of March next year. And then Town colleagues will be working on the final business case, and we'll all be working on that pre-award preparation around spring into summer next year, with the grant being awarded in August for 6 years. Assessment criteria and weighting. Okay, I've checked several times. This does add up to 100%. So on vision, that's absolutely the most important part. I think Andrew's done a very good job at describing that today already. That is weighted at 30%. Strategic fit, suitability to host, and your vision. Can you do it? We need to see that in the applications. Can you really do it? Have you got the skills, the partners, the imagination, the vision to see that through and to meet the spec? Deliverability and value for money, 25% weighting. Can you actually do it? You've said you do it, but can you really? Is it feasible? Is it robust? Is it credible? Is it competitive? And then your contribution to the wider UK creative industries ecosystem and innovation. What impact will you have? How will that be seen locally, regionally, and nationally? We're very much trying to make some considerable step changes in the ecosystem here. So this is really about clicking yourself into a bigger picture, seeing your submission as an application as part of a jigsaw piece in a much bigger picture now, and also how that could look in the future as well. So what impact will you have? And then 10% each on weighting to a contribution to environmental sustainability and to EDI across the sector, really important areas. For those in the room from higher education sector and research organisations will be beautifully familiar with GES and all of its loveliness. All submissions will be put through GES, and the costs are at 100% full economic costing. There is a line explaining that in the material online. But yeah, 100% FET costing all through GES. Attachments. Tao's smiling because there's a lot of attachments in this process. However, genuinely, they are there to support your case. And they're structured very much around the proposal and the previous slide around the assessment criteria and the weighting. So they're not just there for fun. They're really, really important. And each of them serves a slightly different contribution to all of that. Your case for support is probably critical. You know, this is really getting to that why, again, the crux of what it is that excites you about CoSTAR, why and how you think you can do it. Delivery plan is how, obviously. Management plan, pretty standard. Core partner statements. That's going back to what I was saying previously around your industry, your academic, your other partners, and your regional economic development partner as well. These are more than just copied and paste letter of support. They need to really articulate how all of those individual, again, pieces of a jigsaw, how they come together and really collectively tell a really compelling story of how CoSTAR could be. Risk register, obviously, really standard, but getting to the real risks, again, how do you really articulate that? How have you thought that through? And then onto the EDI and sustainability as well. So as I say, this all aligns with the previous slide around how we're going to measure and all of the weighting. I am obliged to remind us of these three really important things. That deadline, we've mentioned it a few times, it's 4 o'clock on the 2nd of February, 2023, please tattoo it in your diaries. It is non-negotiable. There will be no submissions after that time and on that date. Co-investment. I don't know if you heard Andrew mention co-investment a few times. We really need that set out. Evidence from the clusters, as Andrew alluded to, shows you can have an idea of what you might gain in terms of co-investment, of where you might source that co-investment, but use that as a starting point. Where could it go from there? And that is part of the assessment criteria, so it's really, really important. Communications. I'm going to start at the bottom. There's an email address there. I have no doubt there might be some questions after this. We'll come back to that in a moment, but that's the main way to get hold of us. That email address is monitored by several human beings, most of whom are in the room, and we will be getting back to you, but bear with us, especially in this first week, whilst we're also at Beyond. This is the first of 6 briefing events. I know there are people in the room who have travelled down from other regions. There are a lot of people in the room from Cardiff and Wales as well. If you are thinking you want to attend others, please do. Please tell your colleagues in other parts of the country. We are in Yorkshire next week. Mr. Jim Farmery is over there. He's hosting us at the lovely production park for our next briefing event. And then through November, we are in Manchester, in the Midlands at the Royal Shakespeare Company. Then we're in Glasgow, and we wrap up in London on the 15th of November. So we're going on tour for the next month. And those events are really, really important. They'll basically follow a very similar format to today, but please do promote those with colleagues all over the place. I think Andrew alluded to this earlier, a rolling FAQ. There's going to be some recurring questions. There'll be some stuff that perhaps we haven't articulated as well as we might in the information online. As that emerges, we will populate online, and we'll share the link with this as soon as it's up, a rolling FAQ page. So rather than emailing us, you can go to that link and find out some of those recurring questions. And then down the line, probably towards the end of November, the end of this year, if there's need, we'll probably do an online event to wrap up all of those FAQs, but not too far through the application process. So if you feel, as you get started on applications, that there's need for that, let us know. We'll do what we can, but we'll likely hold that late November so that there's still time left in the time frame of the application process to do that. So they're the big 3 things. Remember all of them. The deadline. Yeah. Right. We're going to open up to some Q&A from you guys. A couple of notes on that. We don't have any roving mics. So if apparently we do have a roving mic. Okay. I will try and be in 2 places at once in a minute. And now I'm quiet. Can everybody hear me? Oh, I'm back. Okay. Right. So I'm going to do questions from the floor. If you could please speak really clearly, as loudly as you can. If you can briefly say what's your name and where you're from. A bit Cilla Black. And then what we'll do is we'll try and... we do. We can have Lottie help us with the roving mic. Fantastic. So unlike me right now, if you can keep your questions succinct and brief, we'll try and fit in as many as we can. If we don't get to them all, Andrew and I and the rest of the team are going to be here for the rest of the day and indeed for the next few days at Beyond, but we'll try and cover as many as we can now. And then from there, we'll move on to the panel. So, hands up, who's got questions? There must be questions. There's one here. We'll go to James first. Thanks, Lottie. Andrew, do you want to come up and do that?
Firstly, I think probably on behalf of everyone in the room, to say thank you to the team who's put this together. Like whoever wins it, what a wonderful opportunity for us all to go for. So, yeah, thank you.
It's clearly keen.
That was a total plan, wasn't it? Now to the awkward questions. I was reading the call, and I was just interested if you could clarify. in the documentation or the preamble to the document, there's a lot about audiences being at the heart of the bid and the process, and then in the actual documentation at all, there's not a reference to audiences at all. And I just wondered if our audience is key, because the core document sort of doesn't say anything about it, but the announcement says a lot about audiences.
I'll let you take that.
You want me to start? Thanks for that. I think I'd go by the core document. So I think this stuff, you know, this kind of transformation of production stuff is will impact on audiences, but there's no doubt that I think from where we were pre-pandemic, the big steps forward have been made in the transformation of production, not in the transformation of consumption. So I think that's why we're more inclined, the call itself. I mean, I think that we haven't seen the wearables come through in at the same pace that the virtual production has been picked up within the production sector. So I think that's just where we are at the moment. I think and it won't be long before we come out with the Insight and Foresight unit spec for that. And I think it wouldn't be unreasonable to expect that might take more of a look at both technological foresight and audience foresight. That doesn't mean that, of course, the outputs of the R&D, there won't be lots of R&D going through these labs that won't do audience testing or audience research on it. But I think the core of CoSTAR is the transformation of production. And I think we're also well aware that in the circumstances at the moment, if we spread ourselves too thin, the money would just get dissipated. So let's keep a pretty tight focus.
Great. Could we just have another raise of hands on questions again? Sorry, I didn't clock them enough. Right, if we go to Lottie, if we go to Mark, and we'll go to these two after.
I'm going to echo James's words of well done in putting this together, because I can't let him creep and then not us creep as well. The question was about
Us being who, Mark?
What? That's too complicated a question, Andrew. Accessible to all geographies. It's a national centre that you're talking about within Lot 1. Within the bid, how much do you need in terms of models, or do you just want intent? I'm assuming this is about the ability to be open to all from the centre. So how much do you need to move that past concept?
As far as you can. And I mean, not wishing to be kind of woolly about it, but I think as far as you can, because I think you've picked up on the intent there, which is access for all. So you look at somewhere like the Harwell campus, or you look at Daresbury, National Computing and the cyclotron up at Daresbury. You know, they have to think they have themselves as national facilities, but people have to travel. You know, people have to travel to use them. So that inflects how the facility is delivered and hosted and things like that. So I think if you're serious about providing a nationally accessible infrastructure, you've got to think what that means in terms of people who aren't in your locale or your partnership accessing it. You know, how does that work?
And how does it work now, but also having that sight on how might it work 3 years, 4 years, 6 years down the line and beyond? So how are you thinking about seeding, how that could grow and develop over time as well? To my point before, that wider step change in ecosystem as well, I think is really important. Like, how is there different contributions into a sum that's greater than, a whole that's greater than the sum of its parts? Okay. If we take the next question here, to the lady there, yeah.
Lizzie Jackson, London South Bank University in the High 3 network. I've got 3 very quick questions. One is 5G. The cost of this will be split between the National R&D Lab and the network labs. How will it be split? Second question, could you speak a little more about the demonstrators and the pilots? And then the third question is, can you define a core partner?
Starting from the core partners, you've got your lead bidder, so university research organisation, similar. One industry partner, which would need to be where you're co-siting the actual infrastructure, so that's studio, production, venue. one regional economic partner, combined authority, whichever that is. The other two could be another one or two in research organisations or HE institutions, or they could be from industry. So there's 5 core partners there.
So what we try and do, Lizzie, in this is differentiate, because it's an infrastructure. You're going to need these people for the long term. It's not just for now. It's not just an interest in a research project for and a promise of something. So you're going to need them right in the heart of it and in the management of it for 6-10 years. So we don't want you to waste your time getting 100. How should we call it? The press button letters of support. Every big company says, yeah, we'll support your bid. And they don't mean anything. They just don't mean anything. Sometimes they turn into something. So it's to try and get that as your core partners, the people who are going to be in it in the long term.
There was 3 questions. The 5G.
Well, yeah, 5G. It's good, isn't it? Very cool. Bit patchy in my experience. Cost of it.
Yeah, the percentage split of the cost of it.
Oh, what, in terms of networking labs together?
Yeah, the national lab versus the...
So that's the point of having the strategic board. There's obviously a weighting of the funding between the national labs and the network labs. We're putting quite a lot of money into this highly functional bit, and it's already operating a couple of things on behalf of the rest of the network. So you mentioned demonstrators and pilots. So so this is project funding, effectively. This is pump priming access to the infrastructure. So the national lab gets the job of running that. The intention is not that they spend it all on projects in the national lab. They have to do that on behalf of the network. And similarly with the knowledge exchange and commercialization function. So I guess one might think that might be a sensible way of treating the networking as well. But yeah, we'd like this infrastructure to be a networked, have physical network infrastructure links. But I think that depends on getting the right people in the room first, rather than specifying exactly what they are at the moment. Because who knows what partners people might be able to bring in.
Okay, if we take the next question from this lady here. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Jai Lakshmi and I'm from Edinburgh Napier University. My question is about international partners. If you have an international industry partner, is that allowed or not allowed?
It's allowed. But the activity has to take part in the UK.
In the UK.
Yeah, but no, we would love to see global partners. This is something we did with Audience of the Future. Global partners bringing resources or opportunities, or particularly in innovation programs, into the UK as part of this. It definitely would be very attractive.
Any questions further back in the room? Okay, the gentleman over there. Any more after that? Okay, and then 2 rows ahead of him. So go that one first. Thank you.
I'm Stuart Cotton. I'm from St Peter's Seminary in Scotland. We're already doing a lot of this work on a building that's a brutalist abandoned building, and we've been doing the R&D for about 20 years coming out of National Intelligence for HMRC on the film industry. Is there any help now, as we build our bid, is there any help for doing this kind of work now that's outside of this particular scheme? Somebody I could just talk to whilst I'm in the room?
That's a very good question. I've only done my homework on this one, if I'm honest. Sorry? It is a cheeky question, but we were ready for those. I think probably not to this scale, no, would be my quick answer. Andrew, do you know of any others?
I can't think of any. So we're not doing development grants on, to support people building their bids. I think if that's what...
No, that's not.
I mean, if there's anything we can do to network you with such agencies, so I think we're coming up to Glasgow to do one of these briefing events, and I'm hoping that we'll have somebody from Scottish Screen there so that they can see how this aligns with their plans. There are other people, I think, that multiple bidders will go and talk to, who we're also hoping to talk to as strategic partners, but we're not quite in a place where we can announce any of those at the moment. But we're definitely trying to put in the room with potential bidders other people who may be aligned with what we're trying to do.
Our Glasgow event's on the Friday the 11th of November at the university, if you want to come to that one for that network. There was a question just to that lady there, yeah.
Hi, I'm Madalena. I'm from Digital Catapult in London. I know we chatted a bit. So I had a question. I understand you can't operate on Lot 1 and Lot 2. But what if you're a core partner in Lot 1 and you're looking to operate a network lab? Would that be possible?
I knew we'd get this question, and I have to concentrate and draw a
answer it
diagram.
yourself.
Right, so the question was, I think, is you are acknowledging that you cannot be awarded to run the national lab and the network labs, but what you want to know is, can you run, say, the national lab and be a partner on the network labs? Is that right?
More like the vice versa, yeah.
Or
Say, for
vice
example,
versa.
you were a partner in the national lab, part of a core team, but you were looking to lead on and operate a network lab.
I think it'll all be looked at bid by bid, but yes, yeah. And we'll be looking at the end as a portfolio. So the magic really is in how all of those jigsaw pieces connect as well. But yeah, okay. Question, we'll go to this lady in the aisle.
I think actually that just follows on a little bit. You've already said a bit about it, but I wonder if you could just clarify the connection between the national and the network labs that you're expecting, if anything, to see at bid stage. What are you expecting to see in terms of intent or how these things might work, or do you expect those bids to be entirely separate?
I don't think we're being massively overly prescriptive, because actually we want to see what ideas come in. Obviously that there will be some connectivity and story, narrative between all of those, but we certainly wouldn't want to be prescriptive right now. I think it needs to be up to you to create that and have a look at how you anticipate they would connect together. Obviously, you can only do that to an extent. Again, I think it is on having an eye on the future as well. It's actually impossible to have absolutely everything mapped out for the 6 years and beyond. So a lot of it is, how do you put into that story that elasticity, that freedom, that scope to adapt to future scope and see and horizon scan where things are going next, I would say. Sorry, that's very bright. I understand there. Is that anything to add on that?
Yeah, I think, Becky, it's an interesting question. I think the thing you should think about, and all the other bidders should think about, is they'll be assessed separately. Yeah. So there are obviously there are two things going on really. One is we're trying to avoid the case where there's some sense of a winner takes all kind of approach, because I don't think that works. We've been involved in kind of not infrastructure projects, but other projects where that's been the case in the past, and it isn't optimal to not have that kind of competition. And I think that, so we've designed it so that they're assessed separately. So whatever those bids say about each other, if you're trying to create that kind of coherence, the people reading them won't necessarily see the other bid.
Okay, I'm mindful of time, but we have got time for a couple more questions. So one, I feel like I've neglected this side of the room. We'll take one from the middle there. Before you start, any more hands have questions before? How many more have you got? 1, 2. Okay, it's boding well on time. Okay, sorry, over to you, sir.
Hi, thanks for that. We all know there's no such thing as technology. There's just socio-technical processes, aren't there, Andrew? So, in our case, those social processes might be to do with skills training and workflows. Could you say a little bit about how you imagine skills training and workflow development and dissemination might occur within the technological constellation that you've conjured?
He said Andrew, so I'm going to
yeah, I mean, I'm hoping we'll pick this up with a little bit with Emma as well, about where we are at in the in the kind of skills challenge that this transformation in production is being. But so one of the rules, so this is fairly clear, and I'm looking at Tao here because I think we decided this was fairly clear. We asked whether you could use this money for skills programs and got the resounding answer, no, you can't. So that's really clear. What we haven't asked, because why would you, is whether the partnerships that deliver this could use the facilities that we're investing in to run skills programs that might transform the workforce, either in terms of research or in terms of production, of the locales or, or sectors that they work with. So we're not going to ask anybody that because I think we're assuming that you can do that. It's best not to ask. So we do have a thing about infrastructure funding that it can't fund skills programs, but that doesn't mean that out of this network of very capable new facilities, there won't be extraordinary skills programs that are run using what we're investing in. That doesn't answer. It's not really Marxist enough for you, is it? I'm not up to speed anymore. But is that what you were getting at, John? Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, so the workflows. I think there is the possibility that one of the most valuable things that comes out of this is workflows and the kind of platforms that orchestrate them, and they could be one of the most. They could be, at the moment, there's a lot of hacking things together, and that's formalizing, but there is also the possibility of new niches, new companies developing within that. And I think that's one of the most exciting things, but it's also probably one of the things that's most likely to diffuse very easily, is innovation in process rather than just in technology, I think.
There were two final questions. So Lottie, if we could go to the man in the black T-shirt, about 4 behind you. And there was another last question I said. Yours.
We're all right for time.
Are we okay for time? Okay, well, it depends how long the question is, I suppose.
Well, it does, yeah.
Try and be brief. So Dylan Law from University of Bristol. There's a question around co-siting and co-location with relevant partners. When you talk about co-siting, do you mean literally on a site with a studio, production facility, performance company? And it might not necessarily be that you have industry and those facilities available in the same kind of site. So would this co-siting, would it be part of a regional cluster, or would it literally have to be on a site with those organisations or that collection of organisations? It might not be that easy to achieve that.
So within where we talk about co-siting, within that, there's quite a broad list of what those venues and spaces could be. So yes, it does need to be on the site of depending on whether you're looking at national or network labs, existing industry activity, be that a production studio, a venue, kind of existing space, largely speaking. Especially for the national lab, that would absolutely need to be the case. For the network labs, you might be looking at a repurposing and renovation of existing, so a redevelopment of existing locations and infrastructure to repurpose and expand their function and what they deliver. What it isn't about is purely putting a research-only space onto an academic campus. It's very much about being in industry, with industry, and that R&D collaboration.
I think it's worth saying that, Dylan, there's an interesting, he's a veteran of when we did clusters. We're trying to be really clear, to give a very clear signal here. And there's two parts to it. One is the belief that co-siting with industry will create a more valuable kind of innovation, kind of ideas flow. The other, to be frank, and it's probably worth saying this, the other is a bit more direct, pointy, which is, and the person who advised this very strongly, fortunately, isn't in the room, I don't think. They'd know who they were if they were. Was saying what the disadvantages of putting such a facility on a university campus is. And the disadvantages, they'll fill it with bloody undergraduates. And you won't get the industry engagement with it because it will try, it's just the way things work. This is an esteemed university colleague. You'll just get it clogged up in term time, they'll invent extra undergraduate programs and master's programs. They'll be in it all the time. Of course, they'll aspire to it being available to industry, but only during the summer and Christmas vacation, and that won't work. So we took that very seriously, I think. So there's two bits to it. One is a kind of hope, and the other is driven by fear and maybe a little bit of experience as well.
Okay, as Andrew has corrected me, we are doing better with time than I thought we were, because we had a slight rejig on scheduling. And then the hands fly up. Excellent. So, one question quite near the back. Anyone else for after that?
You're definitely taking this. It's Jane. It'll be hard.
Yeah, I'm going to think carefully about this question. I think having said what you have, and it would have been interesting to have been in a wider conversation, perhaps about the university position, and particularly following the cluster programme and the potential and change-making nature of the cluster programme in terms of how universities, or some universities now work, particularly in partnership. I would perhaps refute that statement somewhat, and I think there is a new space and place to aim for in the UK that might slightly counter what you've just stated. But my question then is actually, if universities are to be involved, and industry as well, what is the ratio? Is there a ratio? Is there an optimum ratio FTE and infrastructure spend or commit that's anticipated through the programme, and particularly for the main network lab? So if there isn't going to be, for example, a facility in universities or a university facility, how are people and skills development going to be supported through the programme? Is there an optimum ratio of costs that may go towards people as opposed to infrastructure, for example?
I'm going to annoy you by saying it depends. I think it's really, genuinely, Jane, really hard to answer that, because it really depends on the specifics of what you put through as the story you want to tell in any applications. I think that's becoming a bit of a recurring point today, really, is the magic is in how that story's told, and in a way you could determine to an extent that story through how you put that into a bid. But it has to be about that collaboration between HE and industry, and not replicating existing facilities as well. So if there's a really amazing studio, production house, performance venue, then it's how does academia work with that industry and vice versa to get the most from that for their world as well as for the existing industry activity. I would say Andrew's looking at me slightly like he's got something different to say.
It's a Jane Harris question. There's always, you've got to think about it, haven't you? It's kind of, it's tricky. I think, Jane, there's a couple of things I would point to, which may not be direct answers to what you're asking, but they seem to be connected. One is, you'll notice in the call, there's a very slight inflection difference around the co-siting between the network labs and the national lab. You'll have spotted that already, I know. And I guess the other thing is, you know, there is something really, we are asking something quite difficult here and quite pointy of universities, which is, can you conceive of leading essentially an infrastructure facility, in the national labs case, which isn't on your campus? When you talked about a ratio, we don't have an answer to that. We don't. But imagine CoSTAR or any one of the, either as a network or as a group of facilities, at the end of this 6 years, and it will have this mixed revenue model where, and Tao, we'll pick up this on the panel, is it? So there's a thing called World Class Labs that allows the infrastructure fund and AHRC to continue to fund entities like this, but probably not, hopefully, at the scale that we will all want it to be at by then. So it's all, the ratio then would be about the mix of your revenue sources. So maybe there's research funding coming in, maybe there's this infrastructure funding coming in, maybe there's industry programs, maybe there's partnership programs, maybe, you know, maybe there's, you know, things that are skills programs coming in. So the only sensible place to get to the revenue, the ratio, is to think about where your funding sources are 6 years from now, which is worth thinking about. I think it's really worth thinking about. Does that? So actually, yeah. So there's one. There's yes. Tao.
Actually, sorry, Tao.
That's all right. Stand outside Claire. Can you all hear me? Okay, so Jane, to answer your question about people, there are two types of infrastructure funding. One type is to set up facilities and to build them and to test them and to put them through their paces. And the second type is core funding, which is for running costs. Does that answer your question? There are allocations in terms of CoSTAR for both.
Yeah.
The co-funding, can you tell a bit more about it?
Sorry, say that again.
The co-funding.
Co-investment.
Co-investment, yeah.
It's Andrew's favourite topic.
Good. I'm glad.
What more would you like to know?
Where does it come from? What are the expectations? And what do we do with it?
So, so this will be much. Sorry, this is much clearer perhaps for those who've been involved in the clusters program. So co-investment can be it can range from cash from industry. That'd be nice, wouldn't it? Like lots of cash that you got complete freedom to operate with. In kind from industry, you could have. I could imagine, so since we're talking about in here building a set of facilities, one could imagine that could be capex match from a local economic development partner. Buildings, I mean, one of our fears for CoSTAR at the start is you end up with too much capex and not enough money to run anything. It could be joint financing of programs. I could imagine a situation where you could get, say, technology companies funding engineers based in the facilities. So that you would so there's a huge range of that co-investment, and so I think we're expecting the partners through their core, we've got this idea of these kind of core partners. We expect them to be really bound in and contributing very heavily and actually be prepared to state things at this point. And then I think what we'd like is a kind of map of how that would develop over time. Because I think there's no doubt with any of these kind of things, and the same thing happened with clusters, is once you set it up, essentially, somebody said about the clusters program that what had actually been the incredible thing that it created was it created a landing strip for other people's money, and that's the trick here. If you can.
So if I'm a partner international, I could say I want to invest into it, and number of engineers. That will work.
I think if you say something like that, you'll be very busy in the tea break afterwards.
But yeah, that's I work for these guys, so I look at this from the industrial standpoint. So if we were to say, we want to invest a team or a group of engineers to work at a facility for the next N years or forever.
I would imagine, say, you or Microsoft Mixed Reality or Epic or anybody would have an interest in this facility, at least in part of it, having access to your not just your current technology, but your future pipeline, and derive partnerships out of that. So therefore, you might want to think of contributing in that way. Yeah. Please, I think everybody would love a disguise-funded R&D team of engineers in their bid.
Okay, we've probably got time for one more. Is there any further questions? Or are you just... Oh, there we go.
Damn, I thought we'd talked them out.
It's close. It's close.
I know.
Last one. My question is, because it's creative industry, and I think we've had this conversation before about blurring the lines, and I don't think the actual bid shows you where those lines stand. And should those lines exist, because there's a crossover now into industry, because creative is becoming part of major industries that weren't creative before, but there's training and things like that. So how do you work those lines, and where do you draw the barriers?
I'd say they're so blurry, we haven't put them there in a way. So I think what we're saying is, this is what this funding is for. It can't fund everything. I mean, we brought out skills. There's also incubation that can't fund things like that. Doesn't mean they're not great things to do and have, but that might mean other partners coming in. And I think the thing about, as you say, about the blend into, you know, on the automotive on the one side, architecture, built environment on the other. If you're creating virtual assets to create buildings in the metaverse, then where do you stop between that and creating virtual assets that are digital twins of real buildings? You know, so I think we're very open to the permeability of it, but as long as the core of what it delivers is for this sector. Does that? I know it's not. It's a bit jelly and walls, but.
Okay, great. Thank you, everyone, for some really good questions. I think it's really important that we now do a seamless transition, seamless in inverted commas,
I'll move chairs.
where this mic is going to be rapidly removed from me and given to Tao, and furniture is going to move, and Andrew looks like he's going to get his guitar out. But we've got some lovely guests here who we're going to hear from next. So I want to introduce the panel. And could you thank you.